Everybody, my name is Josh Schulman. I work at the Schechter Institutes, and I am thrilled that you've joined us this evening, this afternoon, this morning, for Zooming with Rabbi Benjamin Siegel. Rabbi Siegel was the president of Schechter back a few years ago. Let's not say it, but I will say this. In 2009, Rabbi Siegel published his commentary on Song of Songs with Geffen Publishing. He realized he enjoyed it, and he has much more that he wants to contribute to everybody's knowledge. Therefore, and Rabbi Siegel, I hope I'm saying this correctly, you made it your retirement mission to publish commentaries / translations of all 5 Megillot. He started with Song of Songs with Geffen Publishing in 2009. And since then, he's been publishing with Schechter and Geffen. 2013, he published Psalms, though it is not one of the 5 scrolls, not one of the Chamesh Megillot. It may be Rabbi Siegel's hottest seller. In 2017 came Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. 2020, the Book of Ruth. 2022, the Book of Esther, which I found tremendously exciting. In 2024, Lamentations or Echa. In the comment section, you will find a link to purchase any or all of Rabbi Siegel's books at the Schechter.edu website. Rabbi Siegel will be taking questions at the end of his presentation. So if you have questions, you can put them into the chat, or you can wait and put your hand up when we're talking. Rabbi Siegel, bavakasha, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining. This is a real pleasure. I'm just enjoying seeing you all at the moment, and I'm switching between screens here. Allow me to begin with a few introductions, because that's what one does, to keep us all on the same page. And there will be time for questions at the end. Even when the official time ends, I stay around if there are more questions. So up to you, whatever you want. First, let's get this simple external view of this. The book of Lamentations, Echa, is a book in the book within the section of the Bible known as Writings. It's read on Tisha B'Av, this day of regret and tragedy. It is sad. Given its framework and its subject and its tone, it's not exactly a book that people go back to and read. I hope to acquaint you, if you don't know the book, or reacquaint you, if you do know the book, with the book. It has been my pleasure, that's an odd word for Kohelet, but satisfaction to work on the book of Kohelet, of Echa, for these last 2 years. The 5th of the 5 Megillot. Is it the most difficult one? Well, it certainly is the saddest, but actually it's quite surprising. My goal is to encourage you to read it and then read it again. And of course, with the new perspectives that I share with you tonight. That's the first introduction. First, I want to dwell on what is unique about Echa as I see it, okay? Part of this is me. Part of this is well accepted. Ramban, the Nachmanides, 13th century, wrote a commentary on Echa. It has been lost. We don't have it. A scholar not so long ago found the introduction of Ramban to his commentary on Echa, and he states quite clearly the following, more or less, I'm paraphrasing. When Jeremiah wrote Lamentations, Jeremiah in that age, and for a couple thousand years, was thought to be the author of Lamentations. He was not, but he was thought to be. But let's go on. When Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations, he wrote it as if 5 different people wrote it. This is in the 13th century. I agree with him. Like the picture Rashomon, the same story in four perspectives, or like the Alexandrian Quartet, four novels about the same events, but four perspectives. This book is about the destruction of Jerusalem from five different perspectives. More than that, I believe, I hope that I've proved, that each of the successive demonstrations, these five books, each of which honors the alphabet in a full way. They say this is from A to Z, it's from Aleph to Tav, this is a story, and then the next guy comes, the next guy comes. So the last one uses 22 verses like the Bible. They respond to each other, they react to each other, and if you don't see that, you miss what the book's talking about. And very few people, frankly, I don't know any, talk about the way they react to one another. Further, since it's five different reactions to tragedy, it can become very important and informative to times of tragedy. Without giving points of how bad, we're certainly not far from a time of tragedy at the present age. Okay. Third introduction, historical background. You know this in a general way, but I'll say, how did Jerusalem become so important? How is it that the author of the first and the second and the fourth opens up with it? How can this be that Jerusalem is destroyed? Well, it's simple. No. The background there is what happened to the Jews. When David became king, he took Jerusalem to unify the people. And he brought the symbol from the desert period into Jerusalem. David, being this wildly successful king in the year 1000 BC and on, brought all that power and success and the symbols of the past, the ark, to this new capital, which bordered north and south and therefore could unite the people, just as Washington was created to unite the United States, or Canberra was created to unite Australian states. And it became more than what a city or capital would be, especially when his son Solomon built the temple. His son was very rich because of David's activities, and it became one of the greatest cities that anyone had ever seen, certainly any Jew had ever seen. This was a great city. Stage one, stage two, the kingdom split, and Jerusalem became the capital of the south. But the north eventually disappeared. Well, that's not too relevant. What is relevant is that a few years after the north was destroyed, the superpower, the Assyrians, came and besieged Jerusalem after already having destroyed Egypt and run across the cities in the south. They came and besieged Jerusalem. We have the Assyrian version. It's true what happened. The explanation's different. The Assyrians say they came and left. The Jews saw them come, threatened to destroy their capital, and the superpower was facing good old Jerusalem, and then they left. Their conclusion was clear. God, excuse my vernacular, ain't never going to let anyone destroy his city. This city is impenetrable. It can't be destroyed. It's perfect. As a third stage, there was always ups and downs. There were always ups and downs in Israel's history. Third stage comes the King Josiah towards the end of the First Temple period. They find in his time a book that they verify as a book of the Bible. We think it was a version of Deuteronomy, or all of Deuteronomy. Uniquely, Deuteronomy emphasizes that wonderful phrase, the city which God has chosen. No other book of the Bible does that. And Josiah undertakes a reform, destroys all the local sanctuary, puts all the worship into Jerusalem. This is the be-all, end-all, the source of our history, the locus of where we are. This is Jerusalem that will last forever. That's the background. When it's destroyed, all the people who write Echa can only respond to, how did this ever happen? What happened? How did this, it can't be. And it was, and it can't be. That's the third introduction. It just couldn't be. Fourth, let me tell you what I'm going to say. I would like to walk through the 5 chapters, briefly what they each say. And then when I'm done with that, talk about that which is shared by all 5 authors, or opinions or places. One person could have written it as a genius. I admit that. I just don't think it happened. And I will end with comments on the relevance till today. Then there will be questions. Today meaning post October 7th. Then I'll leave time for questions. If there's other time, I have lots of other things to say. Okay, with that, I'm going to chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Echa, of Lamentations, is the one that is so good that it dominates all of our opinions. We think that Lamentations is what chapter 1 is about. Chapter 1 is this incredible sadness, picture of a woman who is a widow. She's crying. She has no rights. She has no power. Her children are dead. It is dominated by that view, that sadness, that misery is what we think the book of Jerusalem is about, as typified by Jerusalem, the woman who is now a widow and crying and crying. The chapter is unique. It is an acrostic, ABC, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, with 6 phrases for every letter. That had not happened before. And it includes a total chiasm. In Hebrew, that's atbesh. It's Aleph, Bet. The first verse and the last verse have a word. The second verse and the next to the last verse have a different word. The third verse and 3 verses back. It collapses into the middle. This is a total chiasm for 22 verses, a brilliant piece of work. And the center of all that, when you collapse, are the words, I have become worthless. In the words of Jerusalem is worthless. She is sobbing. She is crying. The chapter is framed by a word which is great or big, and it moves from the great number of people to the great mourning, if you will. It's moving from size of Jerusalem, ZE, to size, SIGS, of Jerusalem, GHS of Jerusalem. The guide words, which reflect what's going on, the words that carry the text through, are Emi Menachem, I have no comforter. If you can imagine misery, in this case of death, in the story, the picture that I'm painting, of someone who loses someone very dear to them and sits Shiva, and no one comes. Nobody. Emi Menachem. Misery needs company. No Menachem in chapter 1. It is marked by the word sar, narrows, straits, the foes. Another term which is basic is mar, bitterness or rebellion. It is not surprising that this incredibly well-structured, heartrending story, you just want to grab this woman, hold her and hug her and do something for her, dominates our picture. Incredibly well done. There were precedents. Cities were women, and Jerusalem had been personified here and there. Nothing to compare to this. That's the powerful first chapter that so dominates our thinking. So powerful was it that it led the elegist of chapter 2, probably someone who knew her from the writing guilds. I pause. I do not know if men or women wrote these 5 chapters. I cannot tell you. I've thought and thought, I cannot tell you. I have opinions. It could be a man, it could be a woman in any instance. So when I say, he or she, just take it that way. You'll figure it out. Women did write parts of the Bible, and I don't know. Back to the second chapter. The second elegist really appreciated the first. She saw, or he saw, her genius, and he imitated lots of it. There's the same kind of acrostic, 6 half verses. There is another chiasm for all 22 verses. But with all of that, and Jerusalem speaks, and Jerusalem is personified. But there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference. It begins again with Echa. How could it be? But it's a different Echa. Echa in chapter 1 was, how could it be that I'm so sad? Echa in chapter 2 is, how can it be that God did this? A beginning of anger which just carries through again and again and again. The women speaks less. There's a different alphabetical order. The alphabet wasn't quite set yet. There's also an internal chiasm, not the big one. There's another one for the first 10 verses. I'll come back to it in a minute. The subject of this second elegy is God. God is mentioned by pronoun or noun 45 times. And what it says about God is, he did this, and it takes a phrase from the first chapter, Day of Wrath, and it makes it its theme words. God is angry, he is wrathful, and he has done something which we cannot understand. Let me just here, let me tell you, just for fun, if you will, the verbs used in the first 10 sentences which describe God's activities. I don't have them all, but most of them. I just put them in some repeat. Cast down, did not remember, destroyed, demolished, leveled, dishonored, cut off, burned like a fire, consumed, bent his bow, poured out his rage, laid waste, plowed under, effaced the memory, spurned, rejected, attacked, shattered. You couldn't have done it more. Responds to the first, as I told you, by form, also develops Day of Wrath, but also responds to the plea of chapter 1, that word that typified it, where is my comforter? The response is, I can't comfort you. I don't know how to comfort you. There is no comfort. And then the word comfort disappears from the book. Right? There's just, it's as if the second elegist came along to the first and said, it's not about being sad, it's being angry. Be angry. Yell. Nevertheless, the second elegist probably wanted to end the book. The word great that opened the first elegy, Rabati B'Goyim, is echoed at the last verse of chapter 2. The children which I reared, Ribiti, Rabati, Ribiti. The second elegist saw his or her work as completing somehow the view of who this woman is, and put together sadness and anger, which I guess is possible, and you get a book. But then comes the third elegy, which will seal the fact that these are separate. Talk about radical changes. First, there's technical changes. There's a different acrostic, not each letter with 6 verses, but 3, AAA, BBB, CCC. What's really striking, if you read slowly, is you'll see there's totally different vocabulary, new words. It's like this third elegist never read the first 2, who keep echoing one another. New words altogether. I'll come back to get. And more than anything else is the opening. Ani hagever, says the opening. I am the man. Shocking, first, because the woman, Jerusalem, and women had totally dominated this book. The second elegy, and a little bit the first, makes it very clear there were no men left around. Gever, besides meaning man, could mean like a hitkaber, to survive. It's a survivor. That's probably what it means yet here. And then you read this psalm. It's in little verses. It's 66 verses, B, all times 22. You read the psalm for 39 verses, 39, and there's not a mention of the destruction of Jerusalem. Nothing. It's not there. This man talks for 20 verses about how he has suffered and was saved, but now he's suffering. He looks for help. The next 19 verses are God is good. God doesn't punish forever. God takes it back and brings back and listens to prayer. He's not a bad person. He's a good person. He will save, all in different terms from chapters 1 and 2. That's shocking enough. It's as if somebody wandered into the wrong psalm, right? That's where you are at that point. And then with verse 40 is a second radical change, because all of a sudden, he says at verse 39, so pray to God. And then all of a sudden, the people show up and they pray and they say, yes, we have sinned. We have done wrong. We have done wrong. We confess to God. And the language is from chapters 1 and 2. Right? The language changes to what chapters 1 or 2 are to. Chapter 3 might have even up to this point been criticizing chapter 1, because at one point he says, if you've suffered, sit alone and be quiet. Remember how chapter 1 opens, the widow sits and cries. All right? So the people all of a sudden pray to God, all will be well, right? But comes the most shocking verse until we get to the end of the Lamentations. They pray, and in the middle of a verse, you get these 3 words: Ata lo salachta. You have not forgiven. He convinced through his own confession or whatever, the people to pray. They pray, and God says no, or God remains silent. God does not forgive. And they don't know what to do. They cry. He, the author of chapter 3, I think, can only cry for the people. And then in one radical change, which I just leave to you, when you read the book next time, if you can explain it to me, please do so. I cannot. That author of chapter 3, having heard the people say, I failed, we failed, God doesn't answer, he goes back and prays for his own situation again. And as if the middle section wasn't there, he prays and asks for God's help. A last verse could apply to the people and him both, but if you can explain how the man, after that failure of the people to gain forgiveness, still prays to God, write me a letter. All right. Chapter 4 accepts chapter 3. Prayer doesn't work. And chapter 4 has no prayer. Uniquely in the book of Lamentations, there's no prayer here. And goes back to the opening of chapters 1 and 2, which I think 4 was written by a woman, I don't know why, but I think she read chapters 1 and 2. Obviously she did. She re-accepts Echa. How can it be? But that's not the sadness of chapter 1, and it's not the anger of chapter 2. This is something else. All she's trying to do is say, I'm going to tell this to you objectively. I'm going to handle this by sticking to the facts, but the facts are bigger than life. So she does it, these facts, by metaphor and description. And all of these metaphors are impossibly bigger than life. She opens up, how can it be that gold tarnishes, that gold is tarnished? You're not metallurgists, but I will tell you, gold cannot be tarnished. Can't be. Pure gold cannot be tarnished. And then she goes on to all these situations. We were bad, worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, worse than the worst animals. You have to know husbandry or whatever, I don't know, animals, flora, fauna to know this, but ostriches were considered the height of cruelty. And we find that elsewhere in the Bible. They evidently would abandon their eggs to attack other ostriches, stamp all over them, steal other ostriches' eggs. They were crueler than the ostriches, crueler than the cruelest animal. This is the rich turn poor. Those who were as pure as white turn black as coal. Everything goes from A to Z, but she's just trying to lay it out and maybe handle it by saying what it was, worse than anything that could be, and then she breaks down. She breaks down because, with the exception of the middle of chapter 3, the whole book had been about I. And so had she started with, let me tell you, I will tell you. And all of a sudden, she talks in the name of the people. We have suffered. She's part of all the suffering she describes. She's part of the crying. She's just overwhelmed, and the reporter just can't stand back and report. She just tells how she feels, and then finally takes the step which no one can understand, but is very important. She says, you know what? It's ended. It's not going to get worse for the Jews. It's ended. It's going to be very bad for the enemies. Their punishment starts now. No justification, no hint of how that happened, no hint that that's a reality from the outside. She just decides, that's all I can tell you. It's over. It's over. If you start applying this to other situations, I think you can see people talking like that. Chapter 5, with all the changes I've described, is almost indescribable in terms of changes. Chapter 5 is the most radical, and chapter 5, the elegist symbolizes it by saying very bluntly, the hell with the alphabet, the hell with that kind of order, the hell with poetry. This is not ordered. This is not great poetry. This is terrible. Now, it still honors the alphabet, 22 verses, and it still is written as poetry in verses, but in this place alone, in half brief, horrible verses. I wanted to read some of them to you because you just have to. It's like you were sitting next to the kettle, the big drum in an orchestra when it's banging out the rhythm one by one. And that's how it goes. It goes bum, bum, bum. We've become orphans, our mothers widows. We pay for water to drink, our wood is at a price. We reach to Egypt, our seer to get bread, our fathers sinned and are no more. We suffer their iniquities, slaves rule over us. No one is there to deliver us. Our skin is turned burning hot because of the fever of famine. Women were ravished, maidens in the cities, nobles hung, elders shown no respect. Again, boom, boom, boom. It starts as a prayer. It starts as a prayer. It says, remember God. And then it bangs into your head like nothing that we've come to. Finally, that as it comes to its end, towards the end, the next to the last verse, the prayer comes and is restated as a real prayer. And it reads as follows. You know this verse. We say it when we bring when we take out the ark, when we put the Torah back in the ark. Return us to you, and we will return. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. Return us, O God, to you, O Lord, and we will return. You may think that's positive. Let me explain. When Jeremiah, the prophet of the time, spoke, he said, Shuva Eli. I didn't write the Hebrew right. The Hebrew English got all messed up. Excuse me. But essentially, he says to the people of Israel, "Return to me, and I will bring you back." Eli. Echa comes and responds, "No, you act. You return us to you, and then we'll return." Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. You're the one who has to act. And then in the most chilling of all the sentences in the entire book, the last verse, the real last verse, before that they repeat that Hashivenu, is, I'm sorry, im ki im, which means in Hebrew, and there's no way around it, don't believe any other commentary that says anything else, it means, but no. Ma'os ma'astanu. You have totally rejected us. You have repelled us. You have thrown us out. That's the way the book ends. That's the way the book ends. Chapter 5 ends by saying, there is no answer. The prayer isn't answered. Even you act first and then we'll come back. No answer. You've repelled us. You've rejected us. This is Echa on steroids. It's, how could this be on total steroids? That just, there's no way. Look, I've described two major points here. One is the difference between the 5 chapters. I'll dwell on that in a minute. Second, let's go to the second one first. The idea that God is not answering is the way the book began. That's the way the people felt. That's why they said Echa. That's the moral of chapter 3, who thought he had a solution and didn't work. This is a book that we have to understand says God isn't answering. I confess my astonishment, but I have to admit to you, strangely enough, my admiration. Not at the conclusion necessarily, that was okay, but that the ability to face the fact. This book accepts the fact that there is no answer. Answers are not always available. To incorporate that into a theology, into a religion, into the Bible is an astounding decision, and one that we have to grapple with. I would like to think, and I do think, that this courage had great effect on Jewish thought. It faces reality. It doesn't make up stories. But I also want to look with you in terms of appreciating the book at the 5 different chapters. Not so much as a debate. It's not I'm right and you're wrong. But how we react and differently reflect on what weighs most heavily upon us, following a loss or tragedy. I will say tragedy. The questions are many for us when we face that. When does I become we? When does the person who suffered speak of I, and when does it become we? When does metaphor fail? In the book of Lamentations, 70% of the way through the book, metaphors disappear. Just facts. Just facts. When do metaphors fail? When do we stop using them? When should we stop using them? Are there gender-based reactions? Remember that in terms, I don't want to get into the gender thing. I realize there are numbers of genders nowadays. In the time of Lamentations, they thought there were two. However you want to do it, are there gender-based reactions? Men and women, are they written differently? Do they react differently? Old answers that we inherited, like the guy in chapter 3. When is it appropriate to bring them forward? And are we willing to give them up in the face of new reality? Sadness versus anger. I digress for a minute. Sometimes people ask me if these correspond to the 5 stages of mourning. They do not. 5 stages of mourning, as published, first of all, is dated. It's been widely rejected in all sorts of things, but they're not even parallel. There's no denial. It doesn't work. This is not about mourning. It's about tragedy. There's a difference, and the scholar Halbertol has written a great deal about that. So that'll allow me to do one more thing until I see if there are questions, and that is, what about our time? I think in various ways, I can't speak for any of you, but we live in fraught times. I don't know if tragedy is the right word. I don't know what words unite all these things, but perhaps there were certainly moments of horrible tragedy. And we have unanswerable questions. And these different responses can really help inform us, I think. Sadness, anger, a search for our old answers, willingness to drop them, a recourse to dry description, just let me tell you what it is, and the failure of that, the failure of an effort to stay apart from the we and stay with the I, the facing of brute reality in prose, not poetry. The question is poetry or symbolism or metaphor the only way for us to handle this? It's a great book. All right. I have much more to say, and if there are no questions, I'm going to say a little bit more about what became of this book in Tisha B'Av, because the book changed as we conceived it, the Jews. I'll do that if there's time and no other questions.
Benji, we do have a question or two.
Okay, I'll start with questions. Go.
Okay. I have one from Emily Levine. Do we know if there were other possible books that didn't make the cut? You may have meant chapters, Emily, but
Oh, no, they probably did, actually. Books, certainly there are plenty that didn't make the cut. We have a Apocrypha, we have lost many others. That's a great question. It's Emily Levine's computer. It's not Emily. That's all right. I know them.
okay, fine. That's
the Levins. I wonder. I see it this way. I think the first chapter was written alone. Whether it was meant to be the first of others, and whether 5 people got together and say, you write first and we'll react, I don't know. I can't tell. Or numbers of people reacted. But one was written by itself and incredibly well. 2 was written right after. And then you have the others in the order that they come. They seem to build the case, certainly dramatically. I have no way of knowing. There could have been 10, and they chose 5. I don't know. There's nothing like it. There are hints, numbers, and here I just can refer you to my book, that these authors came from the guilds which wrote the Psalms. If you look at Psalm 90, the play on chapter 5 on the root "Return to us, return, return" is exactly the same play as in chapter 90, the song of Moses Psalm, as is the stress on God's forever and ever as compared to human beings. They knew each other. They borrowed from each other. That was legitimate. There were no copyrights in antiquity. On the contrary, so there could be no other psalm except perhaps one is as sad as this one. But that sadness is not necessarily the destruction of the temple. There are other psalms written after David's afterwards. The last chapter in the 89 is written, it accuses God of abandoning David. That's obviously after the destruction of the temple. But not in reaction to what I can't prove more than that. So I don't have an answer to that. There are a lot of things we don't have answers to. One of the worst things that some commentators do is to try to give you an answer to every question. Like some of our guides of tourists in Israel. There aren't always answers, and I don't have an answer to that question to the nth degree. Next question.
Okay, thank you. Judy, you have a question, but before you go, let me just, Jay Better asks, can you show us a bit of the chiasms of chapter 1 and 2?
Oh yeah, I can do them all.
Judy, we'll get to you next.
If you
please.
think I know
Not a
this,
question, it's just a comment. Okay.
if you think I know this by heart, I'll read it to you. All right, go ahead. Jay, who has the question, Jay or someone else?
Jay Better.
Is this about the chiasms?
Yes, the chiasms.
Okay.
Benji, I just wanted to give a couple of examples. I just couldn't quite see it in the text.
Oh, yeah, no, it's okay. First of all, remember, please, you'll probably only see it in an English text if you use my book. Because the translator has to see it.
Buy the book, yes.
No, I didn't, that wasn't the ad. The translator has to see it to translate it. The entire book, the way I've written this book and most of my other books, is that the same Hebrew root or term is translated into a single term in English and vice versa. And therefore, you can see it. You can see it in the translation, though in the commentary it has a detail of what the words are. So very briefly, the 11, as you read them through the first book, is great. There's no comforter. Straits, which is the same word as distress. Priests, captivity, Zion, her affliction, and my eye. That's a pun on Yah and Yahveheni. For, which is also against in the English, it has to be, not, spread, and take note. Okay. I think that's, yeah. And that's in the first chapter. The second chapter also has it. I have to give my brother credit. There's several people who saw these things. My brother, in a medieval book on medieval, has a footnote, and he gives his version, and his is the best ever. So I used his in doing this. But it's there in chapter 2. The chiasm in the first 10 verses is absolutely astounding. First, the author does it while maintaining a chiasm for the whole 22 verses. but I don't even know where I put. You'll have to look at the book. I can't start paging for that. They're there. They are there, and I apologize. You won't always see them. If you're a great Hebrew reader, you'll be able to pick them up. If you're not, you'll have to get my book or trust me. There was another question, I think.
Thank you, Benji. Judy, bavakasha.
It was just a comment that we're reading this and it's just, at this time that we're reading it and you're talking about chapter 5, there is no answer. And this is just very discouraging even at this time to be reading this now. Can you give us any encouragement to read?
Yeah, I'll do that in a minute. First, I'm going to combine that a little bit with something that came across in the chat right to me right now. It is astounding that this book is in the canon. Not only that's on Tisha B'Av, but it's in the canon. That means that whatever process led to a canon, the genius of the Jewish people, for all I know, no one knows how books got in. But whatever makes up for our foundational text, it includes this recognition of how things were. Now, I want to clarify, this is not a theology. I said theology to point because I meant to say its influence on future theology. This is not a book of theology. This is a book that is trying to share with you the terrible situation that was. It is a moment in history. They can't handle it themselves, and they want to hand it on to you to handle. All right? If you take it as this is what the world is like, it's a dead end and it's absolutely depressing. There is some people, some commentators say it's a book about hope. They're wrong. It's not a book about hope. And read my book, you'll see, and other people pull that apart. Halbert Tal pulls that apart. But some of the modern people say it's all about hope. It's not about hope, but it doesn't reject a glimmer of hope. It has prayers. It has prayers. Now, it makes no sense at all if this is what the world is like to have prayers in this book. There is a hint there that something can be said. All right? So that's one way in which you can read it. Let me give you another way, unless there's a different question. And I'll go on. I'm going to give you another way, which is important. It was what I was going to say before. The book changes soon after it's written. It changes in two ways. First, the prophet Isaiah, second Isaiah, he starts prophesying 10 or 20 years after this book's finished, maybe. And he's probably in Babylonia, but he's speaking to the Jews of Babylonia. The prophet, second Isaiah, takes the words, one, and here one, and here one, and here one, and here one, from Lamentations, and absolutely reverses them. To make it brutal, God says, Ani menachem chen amar Hashem. I'm the guy who brings you healing, comfort, which is exactly the same. But there are 10 such verses. Again, I can only refer you to the details in the notes here. The book, he reverses it. History reverses it. The temple's rebuilt in 70 years. And then the Jews kind of reverse it as well, not only from second Isaiah, but they take that next to the last verse, which, as I said, is fairly fairly negative, but they put it, it has some hope in it. Yeah, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'noshuva chadesh yameinu keder, and they put it at the end. That wasn't just because the book didn't end right, it's because they want to make it a little more positive. Then Jewish tradition, in addition takes those sections from Second Isaiah and puts them in the 7 weeks after 7 Shabbatot Haftorahs after Tisha B'Av. So Jewish tradition soon after, I don't know exactly when, soon after, creates of the book, absolutely, which it always was, not what the world is, but what the situation was. And that makes it a lot easier to read. Okay? So that's the first change, and that's the first change it undergoes. I want to make a break briefly, I'll expand on that. It goes through a second change because the second temple is destroyed. I do not know if they read Eicha when the second temple stood. I don't know. I don't know if they kept reading about the historical thing and look, we've got it done. I don't know. We don't know. But when the second temple is destroyed, something else has happened because the second temple, unlike the first, is not this good old thing or a backwater capital. Second temple was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was an incredible building and all the Jews from all over the world came there. The world was again perfect. And then they went into exile for 2,000 years. And so Eicha became, the valence of Eicha became, we're in exile. That's not its original valence. Its original valence is, this is a tragedy. We don't know how, it doesn't make sense, we have no sense of this. This third version is already a valence of, we're suffering, we're in exile, for which reason all the keynote are read on Tisha B'Av with the book of Eicha. Eicha comes with all these mourning things about the Crusades and the tragedy here and the tragedy there in Beitar, all the tragedies in Galut. The valence of Eicha changed, even as it's what we study today remains back there. I'm dealing with what it was once. And I'll say this very briefly for all of us right now. You also have to realize that we have a different Eicha today. I read Eicha overlooking the old city of Jerusalem. I read it with my friends, and we're overlooking the Temple Mount. In independent Israel, in Jerusalem, that is our capital, and we're reading Eicha. Okay? The people who are reading there, I know my friends, some are secular, some are Orthodox, some are conservative, some are doubters, some are people who are assured. Different Jews from different places, different times, and together we are reading Eicha. And I don't know what it's becoming. I know I read it and I'm moved and I think of various parts of history, but there's something new happening. There's something new happening. And you ask, how can we read it? Deal with it. What do we want to make of Eicha now? What do we want to? It's an incredible book that expresses it's great literature. Great literature deserves application to our own lives. Not only the way back history and not only what became of this history, but what we live with it. And for that, this is a book that we have to confront. I suggest to you very sincerely, if you read it in synagogue or anywhere in ritual, just follow the text, all right? But somewhere in Eicha, take the day somewhere, or if you can't do it then, do it a week later. You know, there's a difference in this, in our text as to whether the temple was destroyed on the 9th or the 10th anyway. So the next day, read it as the great literature that it is, and one that you want to think about for yourself or for ourselves. I don't have the answers to that at all. That's not in my book at all, by the way. I am not, I'm not putting that into into a volume, but I want to share it with you. It's something that we have to absorb and create, and I'm not sure that we'll have anyone who can write a clear indication of the evolving answer while we're yet alive. We're part of a process. I know I love the fact of where I read it and how I read it, and I leave it for you and me to try to help out what it means. Okay, were there any more questions?
We have one comment from a David Kaplan.
Okay.
It seems so unlikely that Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. He knew exactly why, theologically. He had no reason to ask why. He prophesizes based on the leader's actions, or in parentheses, or lack thereof.
That is correct. I will tell you that the Rabbinical Assembly had a session a couple years ago ahead of Echa by a teacher, professor, who ended by saying, I think Jeremiah wrote it. 95% of the people who study Echa understand, for the very reason you stated, David, that it could not have been written by Jeremiah in any way. I'll give you one more, which most people don't even notice. The book of Echa ends with just as terrible down, right? Jeremiah, at the end of his life, chapter 33, 4, 5, there's several of them, 3 to 7, I think. I'm not sure, but I don't remember that too well. Jeremiah changes his opinion after the temple is destroyed. And Jeremiah says things that are similar to 2nd Isaiah. He said, it'll be better in the future. So that while the book of Lamentations is being written as saying there's no hope, no answer, Jeremiah has already moved ahead towards 2nd Isaiah and saying, yeah, there's going to be some answer someday. So Jeremiah did not write this book. And with all due respect to other opinions, they're wrong. So I'll leave it at that. Any other questions? You can raise your hands. I got only 2 pages, 3 pages. Anybody raising their hand? 1 second. Stay with me as I flip. Oh, a lot of people don't even have their pictures up there.
Perfectly all right. You're getting many wonderful messages, Yasha.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
It's
thank
a very
you.
nice crowd, a very nice crowd. Rebecca Kaufman
Wait, Rebecca Coleman, Rebecca Kaufman.
has a question.
Yes,
Yes.
you're right, Rebecca.
There's one aspect of this you have not yet addressed, Benji, and I would appreciate it if you have an opinion or some comment to make, and that is concerning the nigun and different tropes that are in this. I have read the last chapter of Echa for many years in many different places in the US and here in Israel. And every time I read it, I hear something different and something even more amazing. And I just wonder if you could comment on, based on what you said about the text, what you think the music adds or subtracts from that.
Okay. I smiled at the beginning. You said to me, and I'm a rabbi, if you have an opinion and you'd like to say something, that's the nature of what a rabbi is. He has an opinion, he or she has an opinion, and he or she wants to say something. That's always good. In this case, I tell you, I also wanted to comment, even in the book, and as an appendix on the various melody lines or melody tropes of Echa. I gave up. No one has approached it, as far as I can tell, academically. I'm not sure it can be. We don't have that much information on the various melody lines that our sub-congregations use based on where they were. We don't know enough about all kinds of music. So I tell you that I tried. I think all of them, each in its own way, within its context, was trying to express either the sadness or the anger or whatever. You can listen to them all and make your own subjective evaluation. I'm moved by what I grew up with, but that probably is true because I grew up with it. But no, I'm afraid I can't give you anything authoritative in any way about the varied traditions, other than they tried to match the text. I would simply say at the end, you know, the text itself has new things to say every year. It really does. You can get caught on a phrase, which is fine. Just don't listen to the rest. Just listen to the guy in chapter 3 as he's telling you how good God is. He even says, here's a phrase for you. Use this one this year. It's good to suffer. Not accept it, not turn the other cheek, but it is good to suffer in your youth. I'm not commenting on it. I'm saying there is simply one phrase example of what it means. You can go on forever. A widow sitting alone. Who's she married to? Is that the problem? Who's the husband? Is the problem the widowhood? Is it the problem that widows had no power, that were poor, that were oppressed? The Old Testament is full of the Bible, of statements to judges. They have to protect the widows. There are things there forever to dwell on. Great literature. Don't give up because it was sad and Tisha B'Av was sad. It's too good a book not to engage. Brilliantly written, brilliant turn of phrases and turns of phrase. Oh my gosh, speak Hebrew now. And a great challenge. Just I don't know if you can enjoy Echa, but you certainly can enjoy confronting Echa. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Why is Perek Gimel sung not with the truck, but a special melody for Perek Gimel?
I presume because for every which reason. That's great. I'm going to respond to Rebecca's question just because you just gave me the first answer. Perek Gimel in my tradition is sung differently. My tradition means Camp Ramah, right?
Right.
And what that is the clearest and absolute perfect expression of the fact, listen, people, this is different. This isn't what you've read till now. And the difference just keeps piling on. And it is not chapters 1 and 2, it's chapter 3. And that is the hint to what the whole book's about. As chapter 4 and 5, one tries to make a way back, doesn't, and one just lays it out the way it is. So in that much, we certainly can say that the music reflects the truth of the text. Absolutely. Hey, thank you. That was good. You got the answer.
Thank you very much, Judy. If there are any other questions, Benti, do you have something to segue into the end, or should we say Toda Rabah?
I'm looking at little notes I made. Listen, people, if you'd like to, I should say it. I don't have royalties. I never keep royalties in my book because I want them sold as cheaply as possible. So I'm not pushing this book to get another cab ride. But there's a lot more in the book. And if you want, you can order it through Schechter. That's in the things. If you don't trust Schechter, it's more convenient. Amazon, Steinmetzky, they all have it. Or Geffen Publishing, they all were a great help to me. And if any of you are part of a group, lead a group, know a group that would like to hear all this themselves, discuss it with me, let me go. I'll do Zooms as much as you would like. Okay. I thank you for joining. I really do. And as always, it's great to, I'm not going to name anybody. I am so tempted to go through these pages and say, I haven't seen you in 17 years. I haven't seen you in 40 years. But it was great study.
Benji, you should know there's a comment that you're one of the favorite Madrichim from back in 1968. So just to let you know, yes, other people are thinking the same things.
Oh, I should do one for Schechter. I should do one for Schechter. Schechter has a great series. You just tune into Schechter of sessions given, many in English and many so available in times for Jews living not in Israel. In this fall semester, the fall semester is out. I'm giving one on the way Jews related to the lands of Israel in two different sessions, fall and spring, because I think that's one of the great questions we have right now. How did this mess come about? Not politically, but where did this evolve from? If you'd like to join that, you may, but there are great sessions. Schechter does a good job in offering very nice things to the community. My wife takes courses and they're not mine, so that's clear indication they're good courses. Okay, so have a good time. I hope that it's meaningful to you, and I hope that we get out of our present situation
Amen.
as soon as possible. Peace on Israel, Shalom Yisrael, and we should all know only good times trying to figure out why we ever had a book like Eicha.